Welcome back to My Trauma's Chronic, but I'm Iconic. In today's episode, we're going to explore the transformative power of education. I'm Royston Roger from Mango from Norbury, and today we're going to embark on a journey into the heart of inclusive education, where every student's unique abilities are not just recognised but celebrated. Joining us is a beacon of hope and advocacy in the field of special education. Fariyyah Tasneem Ali. As a special education specialist, Fariyyah brings a wealth of expertise and passion for creating inclusive environments where every learner can thrive. In our world, diversity isn't just a buzzword, it's our greatest strength. Yet, too often, our educational system falls short in embracing that diversity, leaving many students on the margins. But fear not. Today, we're breaking down the barriers, shattering misconceptions, and championing the cause of inclusivity in education, from understanding the complexities of neurodivergence to embracing a spectrum of special needs. We're diving deep into the core principles and practical strategies, what makes inclusive education a reality. So, whether you're a seasoned educator, a concerned parent, or simply curious about creating more inclusive communities, you're in the right place. Get ready to be inspired, empowered, and equipped with the tools to build a more inclusive world, one classroom at a time. Without further ado, let's dive into today's enlightening conversation with Fariyyah Tasneem Ali on breaking barriers, embracing neurodiversity in education. Can you share a bit about your background and what drew you into specializing in education?
Okay, so I did my bachelor's in psychology
Hmm.
and I graduated in 2017, and then I immediately went into postgraduate. I did my Master of Science in Applied Psychology, and while in postgraduate studies, I started working in special education. There's this program in my country in Trinidad and Tobago called OJT, on the job training, and it's a 2-year week contract. And through them, I was placed within a primary school here in Trinidad, and it was to work with our Ministry of Education's Student Support Services Division, special education branch. And so I've been working in this role in special education for over 5 years now. And within that, I would have done like therapeutic intervention, education, behavioral analysis, behavioral therapy. So far, I've only worked with one student throughout the entire 5 years of my tenure. And so even though I started in 2 years with OJT, I continued in the same position with the same child under MOE, Ministry of Education. So my additional 3 years was with MOE after OJT. So I I am exposed to students with autistic spectrum disorder, and would have had training in using IEPs and individualized education programs. And what that is that they have a unit with psychologists and special ed instructors, and they would develop a personal education program. Sorry about the background noise. Um,
Okay.
Based on the student's diagnosis. And sometimes it would have more than one diagnosis. Most of the time it's just one. And they try to have early intervention. So um as soon as they enter primary school, they would have like observation being done by their class teachers, and they would have to do the referral to the Ministry of Education in order for student support services to assess them and then make their IEP. And from there, they will decide whether they need an aide like myself to work with the students.
What inspired you? Um, what inspired your passion for advocating for inclusive education?
Well, I I didn't even know that I would have, enjoyed this field so much until I started working with the OJT. I did not even consider um a career in education at all. And then I got this job and I was like, wow, I didn't know that I had a knack for this. I did not know that I would enjoy this so much. It was so challenging and I liked that. It was a challenge for me. And now it is, I mean, it gets easier as you learn the job and um you do your professional development and all of that. You learn different strategies and you get resources and you network. And that's another thing. I have a big network of other aides, um, special ed instructors, and other psychologists in the field. Um, so really it was the job itself that inspired me to stay in it and to want me to continue on in special ed. I am also looking at providing guidance and counseling, not only to special ed students, but all children. So I just enjoy working with all children on the whole as well, not just special ed, special needs students, because I also would have tutored other children that were not on the spectrum, were not neurodivergent. And um, developing strategies for students, aside from the student that I work with, um, in terms of helping them to read and to do math, um, and to cope with their symptoms.
In your experience, what are some common misconceptions people have about inclusive education?
Well, commonly it's like they see the students or the children, because some of they have a life outside of being a student. They see them as sometimes less than, like not as bright as the other children, not as capable of achieving. And a lot of the time, I mean, I could attest that that's not the case. I see for myself, my colleagues who are also in the field, they could attest that that's not the case. Actually, they are sometimes even way above the level of their peers in terms of intellectual ability, artistic ability. Um, it's just that their symptoms would have been clouding their ability to express themselves. And that's why for the neurotypical person would see them as like, what's going on? Like, why can't you? But really, it's just that they had to learn how to cope before they can express themselves as in a way that a neurotypical person would be able to relate.
Can you just define what inclusive education means to you and why it's important in today's educational landscape?
Sure. So to me, inclusive education is about all students, despite their background, despite their ability, despite any illnesses, that they all access quality, equitable education.
How do you believe that inclusive education will benefit both students with special needs and their neurotypical peers?
Well, first of all, it fosters belongingness, and we all need that as social beings. In fact, remember from those of us who are familiar with psychological theory, with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I mean, one of the important needs that he highlighted was to feel like you belong, to feel loved, to feel accepted, and inclusive education, it offers that insurance to feel that way, to feel like you belong somewhere, to feel like you fit in and like you have friends and that you're not alien from others or from society. And
Whilst, sorry,
sorry.
continue. Sorry.
So it also offers the opportunity for others to learn about neurodivergence, um, and not just neurodivergent persons, but also persons with physical disabilities, persons with health impairment. Inclusive education brings that learning platform, that exchange of ideas, that exchange of experiences between different types of persons, and the individual support of um, the IEP. So you're being supported while also functioning within the mainstream world, because at the end of the day, this is the world that you live in. You don't live in a bubble, and you should be from young exposed to the real world. And I mean, in the long run, with early intervention, they are better able to integrate into the world of work later on, because they would have had a foundation of inclusion, and where they are supported, where they are able to understand how to cope with real world issues and to maneuver.
What does oh, what hmm, what are some of the key challenges students face when they have additional needs in a mainstream educational setting?
Well, challenges, I would say just being in a place that was not like briefed before, like before they, like for example, a school who is now opening their doors to um children with disabilities. So a mainstream school that is now trying to have an inclusive environment, not briefing the staff, not briefing the existing students. Okay, so we are going to have Sasha, right, as an example. Sasha, and she has ADHD with autism spectrum disorder, right? And this is how she may present. This is how to interact with persons like that. This is what not to do. These are some things that may trigger her. You know, so it's like briefing these people before the intake of the student, and even while the student is there, um because sometimes, you know, they might have triggers that he didn't know about, and it presents, and you know, you tell their peers, their teachers on the compound, like, okay, look, this happens because of so and so, like for example, let's say she's triggered by the color red, and no one knew that before she started. Just to brief them on, you know, that is just how her brain perceives the world, and sometimes things that doesn't make sense to you would trigger who.
Can you share some strategies or approaches that educators can use to create a more inclusive classroom environment for those students?
Okay, so first of all, definitely having visual aids, manipulatives, um, occupational therapy approaches. So, for example, Velcro shoes, um, snap buttons instead of, buttons to go into a buttonhole. Um, Anything that would make the students' life easier and less daunting for them to just, go through day-to-day tasks. Apart from that, definitely therapy. Even if it's just once a week, it could be specialized, like an intervention. For example, let's say the child has frequent outbursts in class. So you have therapeutic intervention just to focus in on helping her to relax more when she feels stressed, or like um to just, excuse herself if she needs to have some time outside, um instead of disrupting the class. um Apart from that, they can also have intervention for perceived issues, things that they think might arise in the future. For example, a student who is entering puberty, but they also neurodivergent, you would spend extra time in teaching them how to do personal care.
How can parents and caregivers support their children with ASD in navigating the challenges of mainstream education?
Parents and caregivers, first of all, they need to listen. Listen to the child, try and really hear them out, what their difficulties are. Do your own observation and consulting with the teachers, with their um principal, whoever is in their life, even their peers, you know, to like just have a snapshot as to how they are functioning, how they are, getting along in the mainstream setting, and what you may need to integrate into their lives in order to make it smoother for them, the transition into inclusive education and the um maneuver in the mainstream setting.
Beyond ASD, what are some other special needs um, conditions that are commonly encountered in mainstream setting, and how do they impact learning?
Okay, so I mean, although ASD is the most common diagnosis we have when it comes to inclusive education needs, we have um, learning disabilities. So that could be, besides ASD, it could be maybe Down syndrome, it could be dyslexia, um, those other brain issues that affect their ability to acquire language, intellectual disabilities, such as well, dyslexia is one.
Mm.
Just being unable to like dyscalculia. They can also encounter emotional and behavioral disorders. So commonly, what I observe in my job working in a primary school would be opposition defiant disorders. So that is where the children, they have not just issues, but like severely they just can't follow instructions. They refuse to. They rebel a lot. It's always any like real reason for doing that. Um, Apart from that, you know, students who would have also come from disadvantaged backgrounds, they would present with just feeling depressed because, you know, like those students who come from poverty or maybe a single parent home and they have several siblings and maybe they have to take care of them, they might feel just depressed and because they don't have time for themselves, time to focus on school, and they come to school and you know they already at such a high stress level, so it's difficult for them to function. And of course, anxiety. That would be one of the emotional disorders that students could present with in the mainstream setting. Um, Physical disabilities. So, for example, cerebral palsy. Um, Students who may have been in an accident that maybe they lost a limb or they lost their capacity to walk even, or even they might need a wheelchair or a walker, a cane just to get around. Um, and then we have health impairment as well. So those students who would have like diabetes, childhood diabetes, and they would need to take their insulin. They would need to constantly monitor their blood sugar levels. And of course, all of that impacts their academic achievement because, you know, it also means that they would be tired easier and they would need to rest more than their peers who are typical.
What steps can schools and educators take to ensure they're adequately equipped to support students with a range of special needs?
Well, first of all, always staying current on research, always consulting psychologists, consulting psychiatrists. Make sure you stay on top of what is happening in current affairs. So in terms of Ministry of Education policies, being undergoing professional development and training. Also just in terms of infrastructure of the school, you know, making sure that you have your ramps for students who have physical disabilities, like ramps for wheelchairs. You might need textbooks with extremely large prints for children who have sight impairment. You may need a PA system for students who are hearing impaired. Also, more use of visual aids in class. So you might want to use projectors, overhead projectors, to show videos instead of, you know, just writing notes on a board. just to keep the children more engaged and less fatigued and exhausted while they are trying to learn.
Looking ahead, what do you envision as the future of inclusive education, and what role can individuals play in driving a positive change in this area?
The future of inclusive education, I just think it's going to get better because I have seen it go from, well, especially my country. I can only speak on my country. Um, from being such a small project that is now, policy, and it's bigger, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And more persons are being educated and trained, more teachers, principals. Um, Apart from that, you'd see a shift in even like the parenting. So less and less parents are operating in denial about their child needing special needs assessment or even an aid, and being open to getting their kids assessed for different disorders from early. And I think that the future is bright for inclusive education, for sure.
How does inclusive education differ from traditional educational approaches?
Because um it keeps in mind those who are differently abled, different in how they perceive the world. And it remembers that yes, we have a curriculum, but we also have different students, and we want to try and reach all of them. And we are going to put into place these strategies. We're going to use these resources. We're going to consult these professionals to try and reach them as best as we can.
In what way does inclusive education benefit students with disabilities?
Oh, so many ways. Well, first of all, like I mentioned before, the feeling of belongingness. Just to feel like you're not alienated from society, from children your age. Um, and then also the individual support, because with with that, so you get assessed and you get an individual education plan. So you have a team of a multidisciplinary team that would consult and come together based on the referral, based on the test scores, to now tailor a program that fits your specific needs, in order to integrate not just into the education system, not just into the mainstream education, but in the real world in general, you know, because at the end of the day, what you learn at school is transferable to the real world. It's always a preparation for even the world of work and just for life in general, and for helping it to achieve developmental milestones.
What are some misconceptions surrounding inclusive education, and how can we address them?
Well, I would say that the students are just like rowdy, or um but it depends on your diagnosis too. Like some students on the ASD spectrum, they can have like violent outbursts sometimes. And a lot of people might look at them as like you know, um, they're just making trouble, and they're just are bad kids. But I mean, that's not the case. Sometimes these children are really just, they just perceive the world so different, and it's not that they want to be, you know, bad, or like be violent or have an outburst, the ones who present with those things. It's not all the time it's like that, you know, sometimes they're really just triggered by something that, you know, it's just sometimes the triggers come out of the blue. And it's more so like they feel misunderstood. Um So sometimes you need to, like, for example, in my job, I do a lot of translation, and not in terms of language, but in terms of behavior. So like, they'd be like, you know, well, why did so and so behave this way? And you know, you have to explain, like, okay, it's not that he just wanted to, you know, lash out. He just, you know, was having like a really difficult time with the noise, or a lot of different things um funnel in to producing certain behaviors that, you know, is not just clear cut. um and apart from that, like, also, like I mentioned before, when people thinking that um the kids, they can't, you know, for example, go on um to college and, you know, even hold a job, and it's not true. You know, um I think that once they find those resources and they learn the strategies to cope and maneuver, and they have the support systems around them, they can definitely achieve a lot, if not all, of what the typical person achieves in a lifetime.
What evidence or research supports the effectiveness of inclusive education in improving academic outcomes for all students?
Okay, so in terms of evidence and research, well, in terms of like work with the UN, you know that they would have had their policies based on research, in terms of the rights of the child being able to access education, quality education, all children, regardless of their background, their ethnicity, all of that, their abilities. Um, in terms of the research suggests that the earlier the child receives intervention, it is the better the trajectory of their development and their learning, their achievements, and it's just better outcomes for them well into adulthood. Mm.
Beyond academic achievement, what other social and emotional benefits can be attributed to inclusive education?
Just being able to, well, okay, so we know in children with autism, right, they tend to do something called masking or mirroring. So being in the mainstream um setting, they're able to learn how the typical person would think and react to different situations, and be able to develop social skills, which is something that children with autism spectrum disorder, they tend to struggle with, especially empathizing and being in the mainstream setting. They're able to practice and hone in on that, and also because they get the opportunity to observe and mirror their typical peers.
Mm. Mm. Can you share any personal experiences or anecdotes that highlight the transformative power of inclusive education?
Well, Okay, so I mean academically, the student I work with, I was able to see him go from not being able to write properly, like he was having some fine motor skills issues. Like he was writing, but it was not very it's not necessarily neat, but it was not, I mean it was legible, but it was not in the lines of the note page, you know. So and like now I see him actually writing, you know, in between the lines and straight and things like that, and you know, things that it would have taken a long time to for him to achieve, you know, as opposed to his peers, his typical peers. Um, and then even things like dealing with tantrums and meltdowns, um, using therapeutic approaches like something as simple as a breathing exercise that really is has been a transformative tool in helping students to just find their peace, their inner peace, and
Mm,
function.
perfect. What legal mandates or regulations exist to support inclusive education initiatives in Trinidad and Tobago?
Well, we have our special inclusive education policy, right? The Ministry of Education has that, and it coincides with the um United Nations Rights of a Child Convention on the Rights of a Child, with all children being able to access quality education. So it is based on that premise. And it applies to all learners, all educational organizations, all stakeholders, parents, guardians, caregivers, all divisions, units. Um, it is for the seamless education system, which inclusive education is a major component. So it provides support and services to all learners by taking appropriate steps to make education available, accessible, acceptable, and adaptable. And it also goes on to, so I'm actually looking at a document right now, right? So we have an Equal Opportunity Act in Trinidad and Tobago. So it also takes into consideration the the basis for providing inclusive education for students with diverse learning needs, and refers to children with disabilities and the obligations of everyone to provide care, education, and training. And it is also based on the Declaration of Education for All, to expand education, educational accessibility, and to pave the way forward for establishing one system for each student, for all students, again, regardless of abilities and differences. So that is the main factor, regardless of their abilities, background, their um differences.
Mhm. Um, are there any challenges or barriers that schools may encounter when striving to implement inclusive education, and how can they be addressed?
Well, first of all, might be disrupting the education of the typical students, because yes, sometimes um the neurodivergent or student with disabilities, it can be a little bit distracting for the typical students, like if there are outbursts in the classrooms, if there are, different things happening like separately in the classroom, it could be distracting for the other students. I would say that is the main issue in terms of that. Like in terms of the personnel, I would say that they definitely could use more personnel on board, like not just an aid for a student um with special ed needs, but like a separate person for thinking for strategizing about generally making the school more inclusive in terms of checking to see if it's accessible by wheelchair, if there are enough overhead projectors in each class, um if there's sufficient lighting, little things like that. Like just keep checking on the school to make sure like they are adhering to inclusive education measures.
Hmm. What resources or support networks are available to educators who are seeking to enhance their understanding of inclusive education?
Training the um with special ed instructors, definitely whenever those personal professional development courses come about, try to get involved, try to attend workshops with special ed instructors. Um, Having the schools could invite special ed personnel in order to engage in exchange of ideas, to consult on how to increase the accessibility of their school and their curriculum, and how to teach the curriculum in a way that would best reach all students, regardless, again, of the differences.
How does cultural context of Trinidad and Tobago impact the implementation of inclusive educational practices?
Well, our culture, sorry, I just heard my neighbor pressure washer come on. Um, so our culture, in terms of academics, it favors meritocracy. So the more you achieve, the more A's you get in your report, the better the parents feel about you, and the happier they are. But you know, in terms of achieving milestones, it's greater than just getting straight A's on a report card. For students with disabilities, what even if they do get the A's, it's not what is most important, really. It's more that they display that you know, they are coping and that they are able to function within the mainstream setting, and that is more important than getting all A's on a report card, you know. So for example, let's say a student um who has ASD begins in primary school, and in the beginning, they are always crying, always they just can't stay in the class, and they just, and over time with intervention by standard 3, they are able to come to school and, just relax and, have a good time with their friends and learn. And I mean, they may get C's on the report card, but that's okay, because this child still achieved a milestone that was huge to them. It might not be to the typical person, but to them and even the caretakers, they should see that as more significant than just academic achievement, for sure. But our culture definitely favors academic achievement more than anything. But I can see that it is shifting slowly again because people are now more open-minded to special education needs and getting their kids assessed and learning and understanding that yes, they may not get straight A's on a report card, but at least they're able to write, at least they're able to read, like that is such huge milestones to achieve, you know?
Mm. Can you elaborate on the specific challenges faced in providing adequate support for students with special educational needs in Trinidad and Tobago?
So it's about parental support, 100%. Like if it is, you could reach as far as assessing a child. You could make an entire IEP. You can have an aid. But if it is the parents not on board, in supporting and reinforcing what interventions are given to the child or being done with the child at school, it's going to get lost. It's going to be even more difficult. It could even be discouraging to the people who want to help, who want to support your child. And I mean, it's sad to say that, we still have that issue um, in terms of parents not meeting the special ed instructors, the aides, the teachers halfway in trying to support their child.
Um, in what ways do resource limitations affect the progress of inclusive education initiatives in Trinidad and Tobago?
Resource limitations, you said?
Hmm.
Okay. Well, first of all, in terms of um hiring personnel, they need to hire more. Um, Not just E's, more special ed instructors, even guidance counselors, because remember we have emotional disabilities as well, and you would need a team. So you need more persons on board. You need um more personnel. They need to incentivize training for these persons as well. Um, and not just incentivize, but proper compensation for people in the field. Um, because just like the US, I don't know if it's the same in the UK in terms of education on the whole, not just special education. Teachers are severely underpaid. They're not being compensated well. So, I mean, all of that in terms of resources, definitely in terms of incentivizing training and compensating employees properly, that will help so much.
How do societal attitudes towards
Huh.
disabilities influence the inclusivity across Trinidad and Tobago?
Well, I would say that people in Trinidad and Tobago are definitely more aware now. They're more educated about special education, special needs, different disabilities, not just the neurodivergence, not just the um intellectual disabilities. Um, People are reading more, they are just generally more educated, and definitely like sometimes you would come across someone and like they would ask me about my job and they would tell me about like what they have been reading. people they would have met who would have been diagnosed, and people they're very much aware more, and they're growing even more and more aware about the special education needs and different disabilities, especially in children.
What strategies are being employed to address the disparity in accessing inclusive education across different regions?
Well, first of all, we have different policies, education policies, and within those, they would have definitely have in terms of increasing funding, increasing personnel in terms of special ed instructors being employed. Apart from that, social workers, guidance counselors, training more teachers in the field, and doing workshops on special ed for training and exposing teachers to what it would be like, what is expected of them when they integrate special needs children in the mainstream environment.
How do socio-economic factors intersect with disability to create unique challenges in inclusive education provisions?
Well, first of all, it in terms of socioeconomic status, what I noticed is not necessarily the income so much, but the education level of parents. That is such a huge factor in determining how their child with a disability integrates into the mainstream education system, because their parents would be the ones who they seek out consultation more, they would read up more, they are open to different different types of interventions. They just show more of a interest in their child's academic functioning, and those children tend to fare better than children with parents who did not go on to university and stuff like that.
Can you discuss the role of parental involvement in overcoming challenges related to inclusive education in Trinidad? There you go.
Largely in terms of advocating for their child, because in order to get your child, the resources are there, but in order to get the child what do they have a right to get in terms of getting assessed, because it's free, getting assessed here with the Ministry of Education, it's free once they have a referral from the school. So it's, making sure that the teacher sends in their referral, making sure they keep following up, making sure that they consultation 100% with psychologists, with teachers, with other parents as well. And of course, after the fact now, so after getting the intervention, also reinforcing and supporting the personnel who is supporting your child as well. They need to be involved in that way as well, because like if it is for example, I teaching a child that it's not okay to hit someone if they say something to you that you didn't like, you know But then when they go home, their parents is telling them, if somebody, get you mad, just like tap them or something. It was just, I mean, not just in special ed, but like for any teacher, that would just be like counteractive and discouraging. So
Hmm.
consultation, reinforcement, advocacy, that's where the parents come in terms of supporting their child.
What efforts are being made to address the shortage of trained professionals such as special educational support teachers or classroom teachers?
Well, first of all, they hiring more aides, and that's good. That's amazing. Um, but definitely in terms of instructors, special ed instructors, we definitely need more of those on board. And in terms of teachers, like teachers on the compound, they need more of them who would have specialized in special ed. So I mean they do train them, but in terms of the hiring, I just not seeing that. So I mean, we have like a really bad job market right now in Trinidad in terms of hiring people, a lot of people unemployed, and it's just, and I spoke about before, the compensation. So even if, yes, they did go to university and they specialize in special education, they might not even go into the field afterwards because again, the compensation is just not enough for them to get by. And
How,
sorry.
it's okay. How much does it cost to go to university, Trinidad and Tobago, to go become a special needs teacher?
Well, university tuition all the way to BSc is free actually, based on a needs assessment. Um, for postgraduate studies, it could be up to like 70,000 TT dollars per year, per year. Um,
Wow.
but yes, it's pretty expensive. There are scholarship opportunities. There are scholarships and bursaries available. When you write CAPE, which is like our version of GCE,
Mm.
um, or in the USD SATs. Um, but
That is $8,133.72.
and that's plenty.
Right. So, I have a question. What does the waiting list look like for getting a diagnosis or getting diagnosed, like getting a assessment done?
To be honest, I really can't answer that one because I don't have access to that um information. So
Hmm. How does a lack of standardized assessment tools tailored to diverse learners impede progress in inclusive education?
you're talking about the IEP, like how it would.
Um,
Okay, repeat the question for me to.
how does the lack of standardized assessments tools tailored to diverse learners impede progress in inclusive education?
Well, it's definitely, it's, you can't use one size fits all when you trying to include people with differences, because I mean it doesn't make any sense if you have one measure for everybody, one yardstick. It just, it's very counterintuitive. So you're trying to be inclusive, but in your testing, it's still tailored for one group in the population. It doesn't make any sense. It's actually, I mean, like for example, let's go back to like the child who she has ASD with ADHD, and when she entered primary school, she almost every day she's crying from first year into second year, she's crying. But eventually, with intervention and therapeutic approaches, she was able to have a more relaxed school day. Maybe she doesn't cry every day, maybe she cries once a week. Um, and maybe she gets mostly C's on her report card. And that's I mean, it's not a good measure of that child's, developmental strides, her learning strides, because she would have to been coping while also learning the same things that the typical child would have been learning. So it would be unfair for her to be then tested with the same yardstick that the typical child is tested with. She needs a tailored assessment for her, because okay, so she already is struggling with the idea of going to school, and then she gets C's on her report card because she had the same test that everybody else got, which is unfair. And now she, on top of just not liking to go to school, she also now gonna feel like a failure, or it's just, you're just gonna destroy this child more. So
Mm.
it's just so counterintuitive, and it could be discouraging as to the work that was already done. So she's like, oh my God, why am I doing this? And this is my report card at the end of it all. Like, what was it all for? Well, this hard work I've been working so hard, and this is all. And then based on the culture, like I said, we let's say she comes from a home that still upholds the meritocracy and still upholds, the straight A report card as being this, know all be all. But and then so she goes home with this report card, and let's say her dad is like, putting her down, like, why it is you could not have gotten 90%, like Greg from down the road or something, it just really adds on now this emotional, um I don't want to use the word trauma, but it it is what it is. It does traumatize the children. So
Mm. A- And that's a massive problem, which is, I
yeah.
feel like, is shared universally.
And the
Um,
thing is, it doesn't even only negatively impact neurodivergent or students with disabilities, but even typical students who, like, not everybody is the same, regardless, like in terms of their functioning, their abilities, and the things that they enjoy doing. It's just generally is not a good idea, standardized testing. In when it comes to um looking at a reflection of a student's achievements um in the classroom or at school.
hmm. How do funding constraints affect the sustainability of inclusive education programs?
Well, I mean, it comes back again to lack of personnel, because if they're not willing to budget for hiring more persons, it just, it's not going to reach as much students as you would like. And the persons who are already there are going to be so spread thin, they are not going to operate at the level that they're supposed to, and the quality of the service is not going to be optimal.
Mm. What key milestones um do you hope Trinidad and Tobago achieves in regard to inclusive education?
Definitely hiring more personnel, increasing compensation for employees within the field, and incentivizing training and development programs, and more consultation with other countries who have successfully implemented inclusive education tactics. Mhm.
Can you elaborate on innovative approaches or models that could revolutionize inclusive education practices in Trinidad and Tobago?
Oh yes, like in Japan, they have not not just for not just for neurodivergent students, but for for students in general, they try to incorporate um for example the bento box. They call it the box of love, um or lunch for love for lunch, where they have the parents um make the students lunches because they spend so much time at school and away from their homes and their caregivers, their parents, and the lunch being a way for them to feel cared for and loved and attended to, even though they're away from their parents. Um, Apart from that, again, like just simple things like having elevators, ramps at schools, um, encouraging more play therapy interventions. And it's not even only in the special needs schools, but the mainstream schools. So all children benefit from the inclusive um interventions. Yeah.
What role do you see technology playing in advancing inclusive education efforts? And how can it be leveraged to support students with diverse learning needs?
Well, in terms of technology, well, we are in technological times, so everybody will be exposed to it. Even my 2-year-old niece, she already knows how to find her own stuff on YouTube to look at. Um, Technology is probably going to be one of the key ways in reaching and engaging students, because again, it is their whole life now and we can't run away from it, you know. Um, Everybody has their smartphones and their devices, their tablets, laptops. Um, and within this technology, we have different tools available. So, like for example, text to speech to help those children who are visually impaired, using again large fonts for documents for the children who visually impaired. Um, for students who need visual aids, you use more videos and pictures that they could access on their devices. Um, Again, also like sharing of resources with others. You can easily access, like for example, ebooks, PDFs, and without having to break the bank um through your device. Um and also accessing tutors online that specialize in problem areas, like for a child who is having problem with maybe he has a learning disability such as dyscalculia, he might be able to access a tutor that specializes in working with children with that, and has these specialized tools that he wouldn't be able to access at school because they just don't have that level of training. Accessing like what is being done in other countries as well because of the internet. So being able to, like how I was able to tell you about what's being done in Japan. So being able to see and receive, some of what those students from another country might be able to benefit from, because you would have seen it on YouTube. Their teacher might have incorporated some models into their classroom that she would have stolen from maybe a Norwegian school. So just being able to access more information, more resources, and easily consulting.
How can collaborative partnerships between government agencies, non-governmental organizations or non-profit organizations, and private sector organizations contribute to advancing inclusive education goals?
We do have some NGOs, some non-profit organizations. We have the Autistic Society. We have and those organizations, I think they are so crucial in terms of educating the public on what is available, what they have a right to accessing when it comes to disabilities, children with disabilities, and also raising funds for maybe accessing some assessment that is very expensive for children who are from low socioeconomic backgrounds. Supporting parents, of course, because when the parents are usually the ones who would be, involved in these societies, and that parental support as a network for each other. I think that those NGOs and organizations really help in bringing together parents and professionals in the field for educating and making resources more accessible and consulting more efficient.
Mm. Uh, can you discuss the importance of data-driven decision-making in shaping future policies and interventions for inclusive education?
Well, first of all, looking at like year to year, the amount of students that are being like taken in to the mainstream education setting, in terms of getting to know, to like, and as a yardstick in a way as to how comfortable the the school administrators feel that they can have students with disabilities in their schools, because again, it will also reflect the quality of supports they get from the ministry and from the organizations. So I think that could be an indicator. In terms of data as well, looking at the like, okay, so from the years that the inclusive education would have been employed, to see how it coincides with how it correlates with level of but I just forgot the word. Being able
Support?
to read and write. To just be like simple as being able to read and write, like this literacy, their literacy levels, right? So just to see if their policies are working, so like a checks and balance, and also just to see the long-term effects on society as a whole of this program of inclusive education. It's relatively new here. About 10 years, I think.
What strategies can be implemented to ensure that inclusive education initiatives are sustainable and resilient in the face of changing socio-economic and political landscapes in Trinidad and Tobago?
Well, definitely in terms of continuously being current in the trends that are happening globally in with inclusive education. Um, Apart from that, like just um administration that, you know, would be committed to continuing the missions and the visions of the inclusive education policy. Um, so even if we change prime ministers, that we know that yes, it would still be upheld and it would be continuing. And also, I mean, again, it comes back to funding in terms of employing more personnel and compensating them adequately, because you don't want people leaving the field, you know, and you want people to continue to want to do this and want to help our children to learn.
How can the curriculum be redesigned to promote greater inclusivity and cater to the diverse learning needs of students?
By first of all um consulting with teachers, consulting with administrators, and observing the trends again in terms of international models, again like Japan, Norway, UK, just other countries that have inclusive education models that work and has stood the test of time. Definitely. Can you repeat the question again? I feel like I kind of went off track a bit.
How can the curriculum in Trinidad and Tobago be redesigned to promote greater inclusivity and cater to diverse learning needs of the students?
Yeah, so again, modeling those countries that would have had inclusive education programs that are tried and true and withstood the test of time, and consulting with those persons, you know, like maybe the education minister of other countries, you know, they collaborate with our education minister to um to take into consideration cultural factors and all of that, and see how it could fit. Maybe they might need parts of models, not maybe an entire model from a country might not work again because of cultural differences, language barrier, all of that. Um, but an integrated approach could work. Maybe they might take sections of models of other countries and try and integrate it within the existing model that we have, because there are parts of it that works too. So in terms of
Mm.
improving it, yeah, definitely trying more best practices, looking at trends, staying current on your research into inclusive education.
What measures can be taken to address systematic barriers and inequalities that hinder the full realization of inclusive education?
Well, first of all, um, continuously assessing, assessing all the students, because some persons might go undiagnosed and you don't want them to slip through the system without getting the intervention, without getting help. And you want them to have the best outcomes in their adult lives. So just continuous assessment, um, always just checking up, checking in, and increase funding for assessing and diagnosing, and increase trained personnel.
What strategies can be employed to foster a culture of continuous improvement and innovation within the field of inclusive education?
Well, um, definitely research, like engage in the research, um, in order to make informed decisions on on the policy, and how it's working for the schools, how it's working for the students. Um, Even if it's just like doing interviews with parents in who have children in any mainstream education system, not only the ones with disability, with children with disabilities, but also the typical students. Um, and maybe some testimonials about students who would have been in inclusive education strategies, like students who would have been through the entire process from diagnosis to getting an IEP to eventually graduating high school, just testimonials, just to see how it would have, impacted them in the long run, and what parts of it they think could have been done better. Again, it all comes back down to just doing the research and using it to make the system better and better over time.
What inspired you to pursue this topic and share it with our listeners?
Um, well, I mean, it's a passion of mine. I just want to do whatever I could in order to bring more awareness, just to help parents to understand the importance of, again, advocating and reinforcing and consulting with professionals, with teachers, in order to and collaborating in order to bring about the best outcomes for the children in the mainstream, not just in the school, but in just life in general. Because at the end of the day, the interventions that would have come from the inclusive education tenure would be what they will need to be equipped with for example, the role of work, for future relationships, having children later on, being able to maintain relationships and all of that. It all transfers to how they grew and develop into healthy, functioning adults. And I think that again, I am 100% behind early intervention is key in order to really properly engage students on a learning path that is fruitful. Mhm.
Looking back on our conversation, what's the most important takeaway or message you want our audience to remember?
That they need to recognize the importance of staying current on research, staying current in terms of um consulting teachers, consulting other parents or their experiences, to remember to listen to their children as well, to observe them intentionally, in terms of their developmental milestones, um, and to not be afraid of, getting your child to the next step, if it whether it be again assessed or um it's just going into therapy, whatever it may be. To don't be afraid or be ashamed of your child, and remember that, especially if your child is not um the typical child, that you know simply achieving certain milestones that they had problems achieving before is way more valuable than straight A's on a report card.
How do you hope this episode will impact or resonate with our listeners?
I just hope that it helps people realize how important having inclusive environments, not only learning environments, just environments on the whole, whether it be a school, a workplace, um, a shopping mall, just how important it is to be inclusive, because remember, everybody is different, and you want to be able to make sure that the world is accessible for everyone,
And
and to
finally,
be mindful. Yeah.
what is one thing you're grateful for today?
One thing I am grateful for, ah, is my grandma. Yes.
It's wonderful. Thank you so much for your time and
But what about you? What is one thing you are grateful for today?
that I'm not feeling the physical effects of burnout today.
Oh, yes, yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
And
Yeah,
like
because
the plans.
when I was preparing for this, I was just thinking, like how much work goes into, just having to put together the material. For you though, for to have to conceptualize, the topics and the questions you want to ask. And like I sometimes I see like your page on LinkedIn, and I'm like, wow, this girl really, she works really hard for her passion. And I just think it's amazing. It's so admirable. When did you start your organization?
9 months ago tomorrow.
Wow. Congratulations
Oh, thank you.
on beginning this journey. And I hope that it all, is long lasting and successful and goes how you want it to go.
Thank you so
It's
much.
something.
A lot.
Oh, so I saw that you said that you were neurodivergent.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
So I have that, hence the sunglasses. Um,
Oh,
because I get overstimulated by bright lights. Also, I have my other glasses are broken, so two for one. Uh, purpose. I have autism and I have ADHD as well.
okay. All right.
Mm.
How old are you, if you don't mind? If you don't mind.
18.
Oh my God, you are so young and you accomplished all of this already. Wow.
Thank you.
Definitely inspiring. So thank you so much for doing all the work that you are doing.
No, thank you so much for your energy and getting. done
Okay.
today because it's really exhausting
Mhm.
and it's great. And what's really great is like somebody just being like, this is what I need,
Yes.
which is very rare for
Mhm.
when we like you are filming,
Yeah.
because they hesitant to ask for like, a break or something like that. So that was nice. Thank you.
Yes. Okay, great. This is so good to meet with you and to chat with you, and you're doing brilliant work and keep it up.
Thank you so much. Have a good day and thank you so much for filming with us today.
You too, Royce. Me. Bye bye.
Bye. And that wraps up another enlightening episode of My Trauma's Chronic, but I'm not chronic. We hope you found today's discussion on inclusive education both inspiring and informative. Before we sign off, let's take a moment to reflect on some key takeaways from our conversation with Fariyyah Tasneem Ali. First and foremost, we'll learn that inclusivity isn't just a noble idea, it's a fundamental aspect of effective education. By embracing neurodiversity and catering to the diverse needs of all learners, we're not only creating more equitable classrooms, but also unlock the full potential of every student. Furthermore, we gain valuable insights into the challenges faced by students with special needs and disabilities, especially those in mainstream settings. Through thoughtful strategies, collaboration, and a commitment to ongoing learning, we can break down barriers and ensure that no student is left behind. As we conclude today's episode, we encourage you to continue the conversation on inclusive education in your own communities. Whether you are an educator, a parent, or an advocate, your efforts matter in creating a more inclusive and equitable world for all. Thank you again for our incredible guest, Farara Ali, for sharing her expertise and passion with us. And of course, a heartfelt thank you for our listeners for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share with your friends and colleagues. Together, we can make a difference. Stay iconic until next time.